You're listening to the Future Composer Podcast, a show that empowers composers, musicians, and artists with knowledge. Now, here's your host, John Presley.
Today's guest is Sunna Wehrmeijer, an Emmy-nominated composer based in Los Angeles and originally from the Netherlands. She's made waves in Hollywood both as a composer and as a vocalist, adding her voice to many films, including The Hunger Games. Sunna has composed additional music for Ridley Scott films like Robin Hood and Prometheus, and her star continues to rise with her own film scores and commercial work. Sunna, I want to welcome you to the podcast, and thanks for talking with us today.
Thank you.
So let's start off by walking through a perfect day of composing music. The sun is shining, you're locked away in a studio writing or producing, everything is going right. Tell me, what does that day look like for you?
Well, first of all, practically my machines are all working well. That's always a nice start, that there's no hiccups, no technical hiccups. Everything is working flawlessly. And then most importantly, something nice to score. If I have a nice scene in a movie or a TV show or a commercial or anything, an inspiring scene that's shot well, that's always a great start, of course. And I mean, once I have a nice scene to score, then, you know, there's this little magical moment that happens of just writing music, and then all of a sudden it's 4 hours later, and, you know, and I'm done with the scene or two scenes or whatever, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? it's like this little magical flow of everything going right. I come up with a nice theme. I come up with nice orchestration that I'm happy with. Hopefully created a few new nice sounds that'll blend nicely with my orchestra. That's kind of what, that I would call that a good day.
That's perfect. So when you're writing, are you notating on a computer? Are you writing on an instrument? Are you writing by hand? Are you singing? Tell me just maybe your general process when you sit down to write. Sure.
It's all on the computer. I mostly do, stuff against picture, but I also do library work, so there's no picture, there's just, me writing. I'll write directly into Cubase using Ableton as well. And I'll start, sometimes depending on what it is, I'll do a piano sketch if it's really a more complicated, harmonic thing. But often I'll just start straight with, I'll do my strings and I'll do my brass or whatever's necessary. And I'll just keep adding and adding to it. But that's also because I have very little patience, so things have to happen quickly.
That's great. Well, it helps you get things done, so not having patience.
Yes.
So, let's get into your work a little bit. You've provided additional music to several Ridley Scott films, Robin Hood, Prometheus, things like that. Tell me, how did that relationship get started, and what has that been like?
Sure. That was in a time that I worked at the studio of a composer called Mark Streitenfeld. So that was like 2010, 11, 12. He's the main composer of those movies. And I basically worked there. I was starting out doing technical stuff and just fixing MIDI and MIDI orchestration, stuff like that. And I think one day I think I just wrote a scene, even without being asked, and just showed it and died, of course, because I was very scared. Did I just do something silly? But he actually liked it and showed it to Ridley. I don't think Ridley knew that I was writing anything at the time. This was kind of my early Hollywood days. But it just kind of worked well, and I could kind of I could understand what the composer was trying to achieve and do the same thing or do something similar. And I managed to write a bunch of stuff on, Robin Hood. And Prometheus was a great one because it was such a big and exciting production at the time. I remember doing the scene where she gives birth, she gives herself a C-section of the alien. It's pretty horrible, but I think at some point I actually switched the scene off because I just couldn't watch it anymore. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. And at some point, if I kind of had my, orchestral effect thing going on, so I could kind of guess what was happening.
That's fantastic. So that was probably a tremendous boost of confidence, being given the opportunity and getting that opportunity for yourself, making it happen to be able to score part of those films.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you've also worked as a vocalist, like I mentioned, some of the Hunger Games movies. You have a beautiful voice. Tell me, what are your strengths as a vocalist? I want you to brag on yourself a little bit. What do you feel like you add to a score?
Well, I'm not sure if it's plural strengths, but a strength is, I think my voice has a certain quality that's it's quite fragile, and I don't think it's used or necessary that often. But when you do need it, then it seems to fit the bill quite well. Particularly in Hunger Games, for whoever saw the movie, there's the main character Katniss, played by Jennifer Lawrence, goes through a lot of shit in the movie, obviously, and there's several scenes where she's by herself, she's emotional, and that's when my voice comes in. There's a tune that James Newton Howard wrote, and I sang, and it seems to really draw you into what she's feeling at that moment, because she's fragile and my voice is fragile, and somehow that seemed to add a lot to those scenes, if that makes sense.
So when you're recording vocals by yourself in your own studio, you're providing them to a composer. Tell me about that process, and are you mostly reading written parts? Are you improvising? How many tracks? What are you giving to the composer? Obviously they're calling you because you do great work. So tell me about that great work.
Yeah, that depends. Like stuff on the Hunger Games, James Newton Howard wrote a very particular line, and I sang it exactly like that because I know that that's how he had it in his head. Yeah, there was another film last year. Oh my gosh, I can't remember what it was called, but I got hired and they basically said, here's the line, but why don't you add some harmonies to it? And well, doing harmonies is like my favorite thing in the world, so I gave them, I guess, 2 or 3 options of each line so they could double it and do all kinds of stuff with it. I think that's where, because I'm a composer, I have a good ear, I suppose. I can hear, I can add stuff to something that maybe they hadn't thought of yet, or especially the harmonies, because some singers are good at that. Some singers are not that good at it, but that maybe helps that I'm a composer and I have that ear.
That's brilliant. So you're continuing to work and learn alongside some of the best in Hollywood. We talked about James Newton Howard, who you've been working with. What have you learned about scoring from him, and what have the best composers taught you in general?
I mean, he is really a very good composer, and also a very nice person, which often doesn't go together. He's both. It's funny because he also writes really very quick, and he still does very good work. And I always thought that was so inspiring that you don't have to spend a week on one action scene if you can do it in 2 days, because that's how I work. And like you say, that's how you get stuff done. That's probably how he does score 4 movies in a year. But he kind of has this magical thing going on of writing beautiful themes, but he's also very good at adding electronic elements to his scores, and that's definitely something I learned from a lot, because I used to just kind of go the orchestral route for years, because that's kind of my thing. But yeah, from him I learned a very elegant way of adding synth to the orchestra or to the scores that actually works really well, and it doesn't have to be overpowering or dated or whatever. It can be elegant as well, and that's something, one of many things that I learned from him.
That's great. So tell me, let's go back to your early musical training, the hours of practice, the good, the bad, the moments that made you as a composer, as a vocalist, as a musician. Tell me about those early years.
Sure. Well, like any composer, I started piano at 4. That's kind of what we all do. I always hated practicing the piano. I basically, I did, but I hated it. I was always kind of writing and coming up with tunes as a kid as well. The whole lessons thing I thought was horrible. And then I did study composition and music production in Holland before moving to LA. And I hated that as well. I thought that was 4 years of torture. I loved Hollywood scores at the time, and that was just, they hated that stuff. That's not something I could say out loud. It was all about being unique and original and coming up, recording a broken glass thing and make it into a piece of music, stuff like that. I wasn't into that. So, I mean, talk about frustration and torture. Those were 4 years of torture. And then I moved to LA right away. And here it was like coming home because everybody loved film music. Everybody loved Alan Silvestri and John Williams. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And I finally felt like, oh, this can actually be my profession. And I mean, it's 8.5 years later now. Of course, there's been years here of working insane hours and working through the night and thinking, what am I doing? but that's all part of it. And I mean, I never regret moving here and doing this because that was the best decision I ever made.
Now, I know recently you've done some work with Moby. Tell me, how did that come about and what was that like for you?
Yeah, that was awesome. It was a little random. It was, I met him at a session when I still worked for James Newton Howard. They were doing the Bourne Legacy, and Moby always does the end song for all the Bourne movies. And so he was at the session, and we just, I don't know, for some reason we started talking, and he invited me to his castle in the Hollywood Hills. I thought, yeah, this is still very random. I was a little worried at first, but he was super nice and just, played me some of his stuff. But a while after that, he just asked, do you want to do some arrangements for orchestral MIDI synth arrangements for his album? I'm like, hell yeah, of course. So he just gave me a, USB drive. I think I had 2 days to do it, so I worked through the night because I still had a day job at the time for James. And he was really happy with it. I went over and he was listening to it and, he's kind of mixing stuff in, taking stuff out. He was very quick with mixing everything in. And then, it ended up on the album. That was pretty insane, to be honest.
So you're used to staying up all night if it's worth it to create something great.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, now I have a almost 2-year-old son. This was still before that. And now I really prefer not to do that. I really go out of my way to not do that stuff. But I'm freelance now, so I make my own hours. And usually I'm able, because if I work during the day, I'm so concentrated. I have a nanny here who I pay by the hour. So I'm like, okay, let's get some shit done. And to be honest, that's a great way of working because I'm super concentrated and I get so much stuff done, not looking at Facebook, not looking at email. That's actually quite nice.
Let's talk about your studio, the types of instruments, the hardware, the software you use. You mentioned it a little bit, but go as deep as you want. We can totally nerd out on what your gear is, what your process is from a hardware and software perspective. Sure.
So I work from home. I have a little, I call it a writing room rather than a studio. I have 3 Mac Pros, Fireface 800 as my interface. On my main machine, I write in Cubase using Ableton with Rewire. And then I have my video running in Pro Tools. That runs all very smoothly, thank God. And then I have 2 other machines, the Mac Pros for VE Pro. One is mostly play stuff, Hollywood strings and brass, because they run kind of heavy. And then the other one is just lots and lots of Contact stuff, some Omnisphere. I've got some of the Spitfire orchestra stuff, and then, all this Heaviosity stuff, 8-diode, like so many things. And I often, per project, I'll flip through different sounds and make new templates, of course. But there's a basic template that's always the same.
So what are your plans for the future? Tell me what type of projects you're looking to work on and why.
I mean, my first love is film, but recently I've worked on a TV show for ABC, and supposedly soon I'm going to be writing on an NBC TV show. And so this is the first time I'm getting into TV, and I really like it because so many shows are now, they're almost like mini movies. They're shot really cinematically, so you can still do a lot musically. But it really suits my speed of writing and my speed of working and the quick turnaround. So I think, I'm kind of putting not my eggs in one basket, but I'm kind of focusing on the TV side at the moment.
I think that's smart as things are starting to move towards television, towards streaming. There's just so much great, like you said, cinematic work out there. I've been talking to a lot of composers that are really excited about the future of television and digital content.
Absolutely.
So as we start to wrap up, give me some really great, powerful parting advice for composers, musicians, singers, artists, freelancers, people who are thinking about building a career in music, maybe as a composer. What is that general theme? What is that guiding principle that has carried you to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit cliche, but I think if you really want to do it, then really go for it and be okay with having to sacrifice things like having a social life, because it all gets better over time. Usually every period of time takes a few years, and then you're into the next few years of doing something else, and things change and things get better, and be okay with sometimes taking a step back in order to then take a few steps up later again. I think that's sometimes a clever thing to do, because sometimes people think oh my gosh, I've made it, and then they fall off this fake mountain that they're on, and always just anticipate things that can happen or shift. And I mean, it's hard, but it's not that hard. I think a 9-to-5 job in a cubicle is harder than trying to be a composer or an artist. And then one last thing, know when to fake it. They say in Hollywood, fake it till you make it, which is a little lame, but just a small element of truth is it that if someone asks you, can you do this or that, then you can say yes and just learn it quickly. Because often you might think you can not do something or whatever, but you didn't even know that you could. That's actually how I got one of my first jobs for Mark Streitenfeld that we talked about at the beginning. Because I kind of got hired, and day one I had to put a whole Pro Tools rig together with hardware, with legacy ports, and I don't, oh my gosh, at the time I didn't even know what a digi thing was. So I basically said, oh yes, I can do that, and I spent looking at my phone, looking it up how to do it while doing it, and pulled it off. And then I had a job for years writing on Ridley Scott movies. So
that's great advice. We always have to push ourselves further, and you never know where that's going to end up. So
exactly.
Sounds like things are going great for you, and I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us today. There's been some great advice in here, and look forward to hearing a lot more from you soon.
Thanks very much, John.
All right, we'll talk soon. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Future Composer Podcast. For more podcast episodes and in-depth articles, visit futurecomposer.com. To learn more about our host, visit johnpresleymusic.com.